Hello and welcome to episode 8 of On the Trail with Miles James Dean. I have left West Virginia with Sankofa and my newly acquired horse, Dooley, who turned out to be a Western pleasure style riding horse with the slowest lope I've ever ridden, but was also a playful little jumper whom I desperately needed to sell. I am now in eastern Kentucky and heading toward Lexington, a little more than 100 miles away. And for the most part, was able to ride on Route 60, which would change from a busy highway to a not so busy highway, and at times I would find myself riding through a rural section of the highway. And it was while riding on that section of the highway on a Sunday morning that I noticed a church just off the road and a gentleman standing on the porch of the church. He noticed me and quickly waved for me to stop, which I did as I was accustomed to doing, to chit chat with people. So he asked the usual questions and then asked if I would ride over into the parking lot because he wanted me to speak to the pastor, who he said would be very much interested in speaking with me, and that church was just about to end. So I was on Sankofa and we went over into the parking area as requested, and within 5 to 10 minutes, church ended and the pastor was the first one out of the door and walked over to me and invited us to partake in the meal that was prepared for the patrons. And I accepted his offer, thinking to myself that if the meal that was prepared here in Kentucky was as good as the meals prepared in the homes I stayed while in West Virginia, then I was in for a treat. And indeed it was. So, of course, during the meal, the pastor and I had the conversation about the journey and about his passion for horses, and that he himself was a horse owner with several acres of pasture, a barn, etc. And after seeing Dooley and hearing the predicament I was in, said he believed he had a horse that would take the place of Dooley, and if I were interested, would agree to swap him out for Dooley, and believe that he would make a good horse for his for his grandchildren, Dooley, that is. So I agreed to take a look, and we were invited to stay the evening at his home. The horse was named Bo, a big horse, about 16 hands tall, and chiseled out of a rock. He was impressive to look at, and the pastor assured me that he was sound as a dollar, and if any horse had the stamina and strength to get me across the country, it was his horse. Now, I knew what I had and didn't have in Dooley, and accepted the trade. And since it was still early in the afternoon, I was able to put Bo and Sankofa in the corral together to become acquainted. Now, here's where it gets a little interesting. If you have been following my episodes from the beginning, you would remember back in episode 2 when I talked about the psychotherapy sessions I went through with my horses as part of the preparation stages for the journey, and most specifically, the emphasis placed on human engagement with the horse and how it should be positive, progressive, and include the belief in the horse's natural point of view. Well, not only did I fail to reflect on that aspect of my pre-ride training, but also on what I knew about the personality of Sankofa, whom I knew very well because we had been together since he was 4 months old. My lack of reflection, intuition, and consideration of Sankofa's perspective can only be attributed to my emotional desire to find another horse as expediently as possible. And as having thrown caution to the wind in West Virginia, I now threw logic to the wind here in Kentucky. Ladies and gentlemen, here are the series of events that transpired. Beginning that evening with the two of them in the corral, Sankofa wanted no part of Bo's friendship. He moved away when Bo approached him and on occasion even kicked at him, which is something that I had never seen Sankofa do in the 10 years we've been together. However, I chose to ignore the behavior and believe that they were just feeling each other out, which was far from the truth. The next morning, I said my goodbyes, rode back to the church parking lot, and continued my route toward Lexington on Sankofa, and made about 25 miles that day. The next day, I continued the ride on Sankofa, and after 10 to 12 miles, decided to switch to Bo. We had left the rural section of Route 60 and was now in a more of a suburban type area with light to moderate traffic conditions. I was anxious to try out this new horse, and from the moment I stepped into the stirrup, sat in the saddle, and urged him forward, he unleashed his power and began to move rapidly at a walk. And when I tried to slow him down, he was not of the mindset to do that. And the bit that I was using in his mouth for control didn't help. I wasn't ready for that kind of uncontrollable power in the traffic conditions I was in. So I spun him around, not wanting to take the time to step down, slid myself out of the saddle. I knew immediately that this was going to be a pissing contest, and that now was neither the time nor the place to have it. I put him back in the trailer, took Sankofa out, and rode about another 15 miles before stopping for the night. We stayed the night in a vacant parking lot and couldn't tie the horses out for the night. Of course, you know why, with the corral, etc. The night was noisy, and the trailer shook from time to time until the horses settled down for the night. The next morning, having left the congestion of the city, I decided I would try Bo again. And since Sankofa was the last horse to be put in the trailer the night before, he was the first horse to be taken out that morning. So I took him out, and while I was tying him to the side of the trailer, Bo began to stomp inside the trailer, and his stomps were becoming stronger and stronger. This was a big, strong horse that was not happy and was making a point of it. As I entered the trailer, he began to kick at the walls with his hind legs, and that was when all hell broke loose. Afraid that he would kick a hole in the side wall of the trailer, I rushed back outside and ran to open the window to his stall, hoping that he would get the feeling of open space and maybe not be so claustrophobic. But no, that made things even worse. I had never in my life seen a horse try to jump through the side window of a horse trailer, but there he was, with his 2 front feet and head out of the window. The situation was going downhill fast. There was no way that big horse could fit through the window, and the worst case scenario was that he would become stuck in the window. So I pushed on his head to get him to go back. But the more I pushed, the more he pushed with his hind legs, trying to propel himself through the window. I had no choice but to fight back. I began hitting him in his forehead until he finally gave up trying to get through the window, pulled his front legs and his head back through the window, and I quickly shut it. But he wasn't done. He started rearing up on his hind legs, scraping the roof of the trailer each time he reared, and this went on for about 30 seconds until his hind legs slipped out from under him and he flipped himself backwards and fell to the floor. He was now lying on his back, wedged between the wall and the trailer stall gate. I walked up to his stall and, looking down at him, looking up at me, said to him, "I should let you lay there for a while just to think about what you just did." But actually, I was exhausted and needed to catch my breath. After a few moments, I opened the stall gate, and with the help of the lead rope, he was able to roll on his side and stand up. I took him out of the trailer, tied him up, and assessed the damage he had done with his metal shoes to the window, the walls, and the roof. There was nothing to think about. I knew what needed to be done, and I put Sankofa in the trailer, locked up, asked Joyce to move over, sat in the driver's seat, and drove the 40 miles or so back to the home of the preacher. I told him everything that had happened, and he seemed surprised and said, "I don't know what got into him," at which, with all the humility I could muster, I said, "Pastor, I think your horse has the devil in him." The preacher hesitated for a moment and then told me how his grandchildren had fallen in love with Dooley. And my response to that was, "You can keep them both." And that was that. I was now in search of my fourth horse. That day was shot, and we drove back to the vacant lot where we stayed another night. And the next day, I rode Sankofa another 25 miles, and I honestly don't know how I found out about the breed of horse called the Kentucky Mountain Saddlebred, but that afternoon, I reached out to them and made arrangements to drive about 45 miles south of the route that I was traveling on to visit their facility with the intent to purchase a horse. I was told that the Kentucky Mountain Saddle Horse was a gaited horse with a gait similar to the Tennessee Walker. The most prominent characteristic of Tennessee Walkers is their swift and smooth gliding, running walk. The organization was operating out of Levine, Kentucky, which is about 45 minutes away, as I said. So we packed up and headed to Irvine. There at the facility, I rode 3 horses, but wasn't comfortable on either one of them. And I began to think that I had lost another day of riding time, and thanked the manager for his assistance when he decided to make a phone call to the president of the association. He informed me that the president was on his way, so I agreed to wait. Shortly, a truck and trailer pulled into the parking lot, and I was greeted by the president, whose name has escaped me. But he was familiar with the mission I was undertaking, having heard about it on WKYT News 27, and was very keen on helping me. He was so interested in helping me that he had brought a horse with him for me to try. But this horse was not one of the horses for sale, this was his personal Kentucky Mountain Saddle Horse, and his name was Sonny. He asked me to take him into the arena and try him out. This horse, Sonny, a Kentucky Mountain Saddle Horse, was incredible. The horses I had ridden earlier were priced between $1,000 and $1,500, and that I could barely afford, but a horse like Sonny was out of the ballpark, and I didn't have home run dollars. And I wasn't going to waste the time of this man, and thanked him for the opportunity to at least ride such a magnificent animal. And with that, he gave me the horse. That's right. You heard it from the horse's mouth. I was left speechless. Why would this man do something like that? And I asked him, why? To which he replied, to promote the breed. Look, you know, in my last episode, I spoke about the experience I had with that so-called hillbilly with whom I became friends and who changed my perception of people who lived in the Appalachian Mountain region. Well, I was still in those mountains, and Mr. President was one of those people. And his gesture only reinforced what I had already learned about hill people. And if you don't remember what it was that I learned, then go back and listen to my previous episode in West Virginia. I didn't look a gift horse in the mouth, and this kind-hearted man did not just make my day, he made my journey. Now, my next planned stop was in Frankfort, Kentucky at Kentucky State University, and HBCU, founded in 1886 as the State Normal School for Colored Persons. It was there that I interviewed Dr. Ann Butler, who at the time served the Kentucky State University and the region as the director of the Office of Regional Statewardship and Public Engagement, and was an assistant professor with the Whitney Young School of Honors and Liberal Studies, as well as a distinguished member of the President's Senior Leadership Council. Her groundbreaking research excavating historical war sites on Kentucky churches, collegiate sorority and fraternity organizations, and most specifically, her research into the African American contributions to Kentucky's rich thoroughbred horse industry and the great black jockeys became the focus of our interview. Here's an excerpt from that interview in 2007.
Children in Kentucky grow up knowing about Daniel Boone, that he led explorers into Kentucky. Rarely is it mentioned that he was accompanied by enslaved people. Well, in my research, I have uncovered that an enslaved man named Captain Jack Hart was with.
As have many of our black scholars and intellectuals, Dr. Butler's studies, research, and publications have preserved the history and legacy of black American culture. And with her untimely passing in 2013 at the age of 64, she has claimed her right to become in what many African societies bestow on only those who have done good work while here on earth, an ancestor. Her full bio can be seen below, in the link below, And I'll also place a link for you to see what a Kentucky Mountain Saddlebred horse, what his gait is like. In our next episode, we will continue the ride through Kentucky and meet a very interesting individual who took me through what could be described as a sort of odyssey. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button, subscribe to my YouTube channel, stay tuned for the next episode, and as always, happy trails to you. Until